So let's tie the orange and partridge today. And we're going to start 2/3 of the way back, and we're going to touch wrap all the way down our shank to about where that hook point is at. From there we're going to cut our tag end, and we're going to go ahead now and tie our wire in on the very bottom of our hook. Now I'm using gold wire. It's uni, and you can see it's medium size. This is a size 10 hook. I'm using a medium size wire. If I was using a 16, I'd go to a small. So I'm going to tie it directly on the bottom. I turn the hook point up, and I'm wrapping on the bottom of the hook all the way down to just about where the middle of, and let's use the plumb bob, you can see the hook barb, base, and point. I'm going to back it up one because I want it to hang right there between the hook point and the hook barb base. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and wrap, touching wraps forward so that I cover everything up and keep a nice, smooth, tapered body. As I'm wrapping forward, I'm watching that wire, and I'm going to make sure that using my thumbnail it stays directly on the bottom so you can see where it's at. I want my wire to be touching the hook shank back here at the bend so that when I go to wrap, counter wrap it, it will start directly on the bottom. So right now I'm at where the abdomen and thorax are, and I'm going to wrap a little forward under where that thorax would be. So I've now got my floss. Now I'm using a floss that matches my thread color, which is the orange, and this is a 4-strand floss, but I'm only using 1 strand out of that 4. So what I've done now is I've taken my floss, and I'm going to go ahead and tie it in here, and I'm moistening my fingers, making sure that I have no rough spots, and I'm going to go ahead and tie it in because you don't want to have any fraying of your floss. So I'm going to pull it back and see what happens when you pull it back. So you can't really do that. You want to be able to pull it and tie it in exactly where you want it. So let me get rid of that mess. And now I'm going to go ahead and tie this in again, but this time I'm going to make it a point to tie that tag in nice and even. And I'm going to tie it in on the top of my hook shank all the way up to the point of where I stopped the body in the wire, and it's going to be again right between that hook point and barb. Nice even wraps. You want to maintain a nice smooth body that eventually you're going to wrap that floss over the top, and so my floss will follow any abnormal thread wrap, so you want to keep it nice and smooth. So now from here I'm going to choose my hackle, and since I want to tie all 3 flies the same length, and the hackle you want it to tie in right here because you want to have a head. The head is the length of the eye from here to here, and now I have a little bit of room to tie that hackle in and wrap 2 to 2.5 wraps. So from there I'm going to take my hackle and I'm going to pull out the barb straight from the stem. And what I'm doing now is I'm going to measure the length of that barb from where I tie it in right there to the end of this bend right here. So I'm going to lay it up there, if you can see, and I'm measuring the length, and I like where them barbs are stopping. I'm going to come down a little further. Yep. So I'm going to clean this off just a little more because I feel like the length was a little long, and you know, as you go up the stem here they get smaller in length. So I'm checking that measurement again, and that's where it's going to be. All right, so that's a great way to maintain the length of your hackle. Now what I'm doing is I'm tying the stem in on my side, okay? And I'm going to go just a little forward because that's where I want it to start turning. And now I'm going to wrap this back on the stem because I want to use my stem to create a nice carrot-shaped body. So this is the bulk of the body. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of cut on a slant my stem. And if you can see the slant right there, the way I cut it, and notice where it stops. So each one of my flies is going to be built just like that, so that my body on all three flies are going to be almost exactly the same in diameter. So now I'm going to create a nice taper with touching wraps, not quite all the way back, but just right there. And now I'm going to come back forward again, covering that stem to create a nice tapered cigar shape, carrot shape, whatever you want to call it, body. And I'm up into the thorax area right now. And I actually wanted to say, I should have said, that the stem extends beyond the thorax, that 1/3 point, because I want that body tapered. Now I'm coming all the way back to make sure I maintain that nice taper one more time. And now from here, notice I didn't quite go to the end. Notice I'm at the point. So again, I'm using a measurement so that I can continue consistency of all three flies. And now I'm going to wrap forward again, touching wraps all the way up, and just stop right at the base of my hackle. I see I've got a little bit of a fray. Let me get rid of it. Okay, from here I'm going to turn my point up. I don't want to guess where my point is at. And I'm going to start the wrap of my floss. And I'm going to do touching wraps, keeping them nice and smooth. And as I go, I'm watching them. And if they start to splay, put your thumbnail right next to it and use it as a guardrail when you wrap. And just continue to wrap forward almost over the top of your last wrap, keeping it nice and smooth and covering that thread. I'm going to continue on into the thorax area because I don't want my floss to slide around when I tie it off. So this entire body is covered with floss, and it has a nice cigar shape. And so with that, I can make that a consistent body on all three flies using these techniques. I'm not guessing at my cigar shape by wrapping multiple coverings of floss. Floss is, to me, a somewhat uncontrollable material. And so from here, I'm going to go ahead and cut it nice and off. And please use sharp scissors. If your scissors are not sharp, you'll make all kinds of frays on your floss. So now I'm looking at my body. It's nice and smooth. It has no frays or anything like that. So let's wrap our brass or a gold wire. I'm going to kind of stroke it a little with my thumbnail, really. And I'm aligning all the kinks, making sure it's nice and flat. Well, I come forward with my wire because I don't want it to wrap on that hook shank on that first wrap. So if you can see, there's body behind that wire as it's being candy caned around, see? So from here, I'm going to wrap nice even segmentation. And since this is a size 10, I'm going to do 5 wraps. And I'm going to make sure that my wire has got nice even segmentation. There's 3, 4. Now I want you to look about that third way point. There's number 5. And actually I feel like maybe I should back it up because I think number 5 is a little encroaching on my thorax. So I'm going to back my wire up and kind of start over again. And then one of the things about using a little bit heavier wire gives me the ability to do that without breaking. So now I've got 1, let's get a little closer. There we go, 2, and maintain that same distance on 3. And there's 4. And notice now number 5 is going to come up well back from that thorax. So now as I come forward with my number 6, it's actually going to be where my thorax is going to take place. And I'm going to come around, and now as I come up, I'm going to go ahead and wrap my thread and start tying it in. And I'm going to count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So these 2 here are going to be covered up with thread. And I'm going to make sure I have my thread right there. And don't get anywhere near number 5. I don't want to even cover nothing up with that. So once I've got that done, I'm now going to come in and I'm going to squish it with a non-serrated edge pair of pliers. And then I'm going to come in and I'm going to use the non-anvil part of my scissors. They're like a shear. And now since I smashed it flat, I'm going to be able to lay it right down on there and cover it up with thread and not have any issues with lumps or bumps. And I won't catch that tag end of the wire. So let's go ahead and do that. So in the meantime, I'm creating a nice round foundation for my thorax. So now what I want to do is I'm going to go right into my rabbit fur, my hare's mask, and I'm going to cut out some underdubbing that I want to use that's going to be nice and soft without guard hairs. So I'm going to come right up in here and cut a nice clump. And I want to say that you don't want guard hair because you don't want any guard hairs protruding through your hackle. So make sure you pluck all your guard hair out of any of this dubbing. If you use store-bought and you pull it out of the package, make sure that you don't use any, that your dubbing doesn't have any guard hair. So I'm going to moisten my finger up on a towelette and I'm going to go ahead and start dubbing pretty tight on my thread, just like any other dubbing material fly. And my goal is to create a ball of dubbing that is 1/3 the length of the hook shank for my proportions that each fly will follow. I don't want a big old clump of dubbing on my thread because I don't want it to be out of control. Everything you do here, you've got to control it so that all 3 will be exactly the same. So I'm wrapping back and I'm watching number 5. And I'm going to use my fingernail to make sure I don't accidentally slip over number 5. And now I'm going to wrap. So you can see number 5 is kind of going away here. So what I want to do now is I'm going to start over again and I'm going to wrap in the middle and I'm going to watch number 5 and I'm going to make sure that it's not covered up in dubbing. And there you go. If you can see that now, you can count number 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, and there's 5. Again, I'm using my thumbnail and my dubbing is now 1/3 to 2/3, and I still have space for my hackle here along with the head. So now with that said, let's go ahead and wrap our hackle. So I'm going to bring my thread in front of my hackle and I'm going to go ahead and peel this side away from me that's going to be wrapped around the hook shank. Do this very carefully and come in here and cut it. Just like that. So I want to get maybe I want like 2 to 2.5 wraps of hackle on my shank. So now I'm going to come in and grab this right there on the stem and grab it tightly. Now, because of the way I tied it flat, the oval stem is going to wrap nicely around my shank. So there's one. And as I come up on my 2, I'm going to splay everything out, keeping it tight. And as I come up, I follow it with my thread. So there's 2. And now I'm going to go ahead and continue tying it in here. And I'm going to tie somewhat forward over that stem, if you can see in front there. So I'm going to pull this back just a little so you can see. By doing this, all 3 of my flies will be the same. And now I'm going to come in here and cut that stem right there. I'm keeping it away from the eye. And now I'm going to go ahead and wrap the rest of that stem up. And now I'm going to make sure that I'm checking the measurement on my hackle. It's right there, if you can see, at the end of that bend on the outside. So from here, I'm going to make sure that I've got nice even wraps all the way around this fly. And one of the things that I do want to talk about is on this thorax, this dubbing ball, you want to make it larger in diameter than the body or the abdomen, but you don't want to make it so large that it distorts your hackle when you lay it back like this. Because what's going to happen now is I'm going to pull my hackle back and I'm going to start wrapping backwards towards my hackle to create my head. Now I want to be careful and check as I go back that I'm not making my hackle. Notice how it's laying back, and I don't want to make all the hackle in one spot. So I'm making sure that it's staying all the way around even. And I'm just about there on the head. The length of my eye from here to here, it's got to measure from there to there. So I'm going to pull it back a little bit more, and I'm going to wrap back just a wee bit without making any of that hackle compress really hard against that thorax ball of fur. And I like the length of my head. So now I'm going to start on a nice taper, and I'm going to create a bulbous head. Now, for me, since I'm trying to make all 3 flies look the same, I'm looking at how wide my head is as I'm wrapping this, and I'm going to try and make the bulbous part of my head close to that diameter of the eye. Now, I'm not trying to get as fat as it is, but I'm getting to the point where it's all going to look the same. Don't crowd that eye whatsoever, and take your time. This is not a race. Make sure, yes, looks beautiful. So I'm going to go ahead and make that bulbous a little more. And now I believe I've got it where I like it in size. And so now I'm going to go ahead and tie this off. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So what I want to do now is clean it up. And I don't really see anything to clean up. Notice how the hackle is even all the way around. When I push it back like this, all the hackle is right there at the edge of my hook shank bend. The next thing I want to do is make sure that all my hackle is leaning backwards. Yes, I like it, because that is one of the things you get judged on. And you get judged on the fact that all 5 of your ribbing is equally spaced all the way around your fly. And number 5 comes around here and then disappears on the bottom right there. And that's what I'm looking for. So the next thing is my wire comes directly off the bottom of the hook right there. And then it doesn't wrap up that shank, but goes directly onto the body. So all of my flies, if I stay with those proportions that I just demonstrated, will look exactly the same, which is very, very important for your bronze, because the first thing that's asked on the questionnaire is, do all the flies look the same? When you're putting your head cement on, you want to use a head cement that's very controllable, because you don't want it in your eye, and you definitely don't want it on your hackle. And you kind of want to look for that nice gloss coat. So I'm using that Sally Hansen's Gloss Clear, and it's called Dries Instantly Top Coat. And the reason I like it is because as I'm talking to you guys, I can put 2 to 3 coats on, but right now number 1 is on well enough to where I believe it's going to do a great job. So there is the Partridge and orange, or the orange and Partridge, and it is tied the way the fly tying group wants you to be tying it, with the proper materials: the floss, the 8/0 orange thread, the Partridge hackle, and wire, not any kind of tinsels.